Good. So I think we'll jump right in. So thank you, everyone. Welcome to the workshop on the land governance under the Framework Agreement on First Nation Land Management. My name is Patty White. I'm the Manager of Support Services for BC with the First Nation Land Management Resource Centre. I'm joined here with some colleagues of mine, Bonnie Arden, a colleague at the Resource Centre, Jean McDonald from Indigenous Services Canada, and Angie Derrickson from the Resource Centre as well. They will be your presenters today and look forward to answering all of your questions that you have about land co-development, the Framework Agreement on First Nation Land Management. I'm also joined with a fellow manager colleague, Tamara Davidson, who works with Jean in the region under lands modernization. So I'm going to turn it over now to Bonnie, Jean, and Angie just to introduce themselves, and then we'll jump into the presentation. Bonnie?
Thank you, Patty. Good morning, everyone. My name is Bonnie Arden, and as Patty said, I am a technician with the First Nations Resource Centre. I'm a member at Souk First Nation as well as elected council, so I'm a fairly busy gal, and it is my absolute pleasure to be here to present to you today.
I guess I'll go next. My name is Angie Derrickson. I'm a proud member of Westbank First Nation, and I'm joining you today from the traditional unceded territory of the Silks Okanagan in British Columbia. And I'm the Resource Center's Training, Mentorship, and Professional Development Manager. Thanks, Patty.
Hi, my name is Jean. Sorry, first technical difficulty. My name is Jean McDonald, and I'm a project manager with the Lands Modernization Unit at Indigenous Services Canada here in Vancouver.
That's not even started yet.
I would like to acknowledge that the land where I work, live, and play is within the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. And yes, I'm very happy to be here with you today, and hope you enjoy the session. Thank you.
Thanks, Jean. So let's just hop right in. And first, we're going to have a chat about what you can expect from this workshop today. Thanks, Patty. So first of all, we're going to go through an overview of the Framework Agreement on First Nations Land Management and learn how to become a signatory to that agreement. We're going to find out some more details about the work involved in land code development process. We're going to meet some representatives of the organizations that work with First Nations to do this work, some of whom we've met. And then we'll learn where to go from here for more information and resources that will support a First Nation in learning more about the Framework Agreement and the land code development process. You will definitely have the opportunity for questions and comments at the end of the PowerPoint, but please feel free to use the chat, post your questions and comments as we go, and we'll do our best to get to them all. Next slide, please. Okay, so now let's get into talking about land governance under the Framework Agreement.
I'm not trying to run away.
So the Framework Agreement on First Nation Land Management is a First Nation-led government-to-government agreement. It was signed 25 years ago. We're celebrating our anniversary this year. It was on February 12th, 1996. And just a note for the duration of the presentation, I'm going to refer to the Framework Agreement on First Nations Land Management as just Framework Agreement, or FA, rather than repeating that full mouthful every time we're referring to it. So the purpose of the Framework Agreement is to recognize the inherent right of First Nations in Canada to resume control of their lands and their natural resources for the use and benefit of its members. It represents a Section 35 constitutional expression of self-government that creates a foundation for law development, land and environmental planning, land use and development, as well as protection. The photo you see in this slide, it was taken at the signing of the Framework Agreement, and I'm seeing a lot of mullets The First Nations become signatory to the framework agreement in order to start the land code development process and to receive funding and other resources and supports. Next slide, please. The framework agreement contributes to the dismantling of the Indian Act. It does this by replacing the 44 land management sections of the Indian Act with a First Nations own land code or law. The First Nations governmental authority is recognized and respected under the framework agreement. Under land code, the First Nation land remains a reserve under the Indian Act, and Canada will continue to hold title. The First Nations land under the framework agreement will also continue to be lands reserved for Indians under Section 9124 of the Constitution Act of 1867. Through the land code development and approval process, First Nations governance is reestablished, and Canada will no longer have the authority to manage or administer First Nations land once your land code comes into effect. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk about how it works. So this graphic represents how the FA process works. There's two parties to the agreement, which are Canada and the First Nation. And the two parties jointly appoint a verifier to monitor the process. So in order to ratify the FA, the framework agreement, a nation develops a land code and a community ratification process document, while also negotiating the individual agreement with Canada, which, once approved by the community, will set out the details around the transfer of jurisdiction from Canada back to the nation. As I mentioned, the First Nations ratify the framework agreement by passing those important documents, the land code and the ratification process. Canada ratifies the framework agreement by passing legislation, which is called the First Nations Land Management Act, and that was passed in 1999. Next, please. So who is involved in this process? Just a nice little handy dandy map. Over a third of all First Nations across the country are either interested in, are currently developing, or are implementing a land code. 96 First Nations are currently implementing their land codes, while 3 have moved on to full self-government or final treaty agreements. 48 First Nations are actively working on development of their land code for community approval. Lots of work going on around the country. This is a map of BC. We're pulling this out in particular to show you how wonderfully progressive we are here in this province. And as you can see there, there's over 90 First Nations in BC that are either signatories or they're on a wait list. The green that you see there are folks that are already implementing their land codes, and the purple are the folks that are currently developing their land codes. Next slide, please. So I would like to reintroduce you to Jean McDonald from Indigenous Services Canada to walk us through the process that Canada undertakes to work with a First Nation in developing their individual agreement.
Thank you, Bonnie. So yes, Canada is one of the parties involved in this process so that communities can take over the jurisdiction of their land management through their own land laws or land code. And there are a number of Canadian representatives involved in the process. First, through Indigenous Services Canada, it's our lands modernization team. We work with communities who are developmental in the FNLM process, as well as communities who are participating in the Reserve Land and Environmental Management Program, which some see as a stepping stone into First Nation land management. Some of the components that we work on are, well, the main component is the individual agreement. So this is the document that outlines the transfer of jurisdiction for land management from Canada to the community, and it requires member approval of that document. So it includes components such as all the interests and licenses that are active on reserve land that were implemented under the Indian Act. So we want to be certain that membership is aware of what is currently happening on reserve lands, what anything in terms of leasing, permitting, CPs, that type of thing, because it'll come under the community's jurisdiction once they're operational under their own land code. It also outlines the funding for the implementation and as well as the development of the land code as part of the developmental process, and outlines the funding that will be allocated to a community once they're operational under land code. We also work with First Nations to resolve any boundary related issues in the completion of the land description reports. One of the key pieces that's involved in the Annex G of the individual agreement is determining what the boundary will be that a community will administer under its own land code. And this is where the Natural Resources Canada Survey General Branch's work comes into play. They conduct historical reviews of First Nations reserve lands until they are created today. And this historical review doesn't extend back to time immemorial. It's from the point where Canada had jurisdiction over reserve lands through to the current day, to give an idea about any potential issues that may need to be addressed during the developmental process. So the main component of that is confirming the exterior boundaries of First Nations reserve lands. So if there's any survey work that may need to be done around a natural boundary, if there's any issues around uncertain tenure for a piece of land within the reserve boundary, those negotiations will happen between Canada and the First Nations, and a lot of times including the Resource Centre, because they have expertise in that area as well and can help facilitate those discussions. And then the Survey General Branch, once we come to an agreement on what the jurisdictional boundaries will be, we'll include that in a land description report, which will be encompassed in the Annex G of the individual agreement and recorded in the Canada Land Survey Registry. Also included in the process are Indigenous Service Canada's environmental specialists. So in partnership with the community, our environmental specialists work with the First Nation to conduct a Phase 1 environmental site assessment on their reserve lands. And this is included in the individual agreement as well. It's so that membership has an understanding of any actual or potential environmental issues on your lands, so that you're aware of what that state is prior to coming under land code. And that's done through a joint management committee, which encompasses both members from the First Nation and Canada as well. Next slide, please. Now this is our lands modernization team. We're a small but mighty team, including our manager, Tamara Davidson, who's on the call today. I believe I saw Taryn's name on there as well. She's one of our special initiatives officers, as well as Monica Grabowski, and our land management officers, Monty and Dawn, who also work with communities during the developmental process. We also have land coordinators, Sheila, Terry, and Tracy, who assist with work related to the individual land holdings, and our program assistant, Leanne Lasik, who helps assist all of us in terms of managing that work. So that's our team. Back to you, Bonnie.
Thanks, Jean. So next, let's get a little bit into the roles through the developmental phase. The developmental phase involves a cohesive approach involving the First Nations Council, who submits a BCR confirming the interest in the First Nations land management. Then they'll sign an adhesion document and a developmental funding agreement. They work with the Land Code Committee in drafting the land code, the community ratification process document, and negotiates the individual agreement with Canada. The Lands Advisory Board advocates on behalf of the First Nations to join the process. The First Nations Land Management Resource Centre provides support to First Nations throughout the developmental phase, through the ratification vote, through the transitional phase, and right up until operational. We never stop working with them as long as they need our support. So the verifier, as mentioned in an earlier slide, he's an independent, he or she is an independent person who is recommended by the RC and jointly appointed by the First Nation and Canada. And that person's role is to ensure consistency between the land code, the community ratification process document, and the framework agreement. Next slide, please. And here's our lovely staff pick. The Resource Center has actually expanded quite a bit since this picture was taken. There's a couple of folks in there who have since retired, and we miss them. But yes, our team has gotten quite a bit bigger. The Lands Advisory Board established this body, this Resource Center, as a technical and administrative service delivery part of the LABRC organization. So the Resource Center was incorporated in 2001, and we are governed by the Lands Advisory Board, the directors. There are First Nation support services staff working from coast to coast in almost every province, from BC to the prairies, specifically Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. We work with any First Nation interested or currently developing and implementing. The support services provided by our field staff for developmental First Nations is quite wide-ranging, and it does include aiding in the development of the land code itself, aiding in the community engagement process and communication strategies for members residing both on and off reserve. We advise in individual agreement negotiations. We coordinate the verification process. We assist in the planning and facilitating of the ratification votes. We provide support with milestone completion and reporting to claim funding. Supporting operational First Nations during and after transition to Land Governance Authority under their own land code. Next slide, please. This is the specifics around who your technicians are across the country. We are dedicated to supporting our First Nations communities. And, oh, did you advance a little soon, Patty? I had more to say on that slide. Sorry. So yes, in addition to the supports I just listed, we also provide supports with intergovernmental relations and training resources and support services for signatory nations. We provide information to interested nations. The Resource Center places great emphasis on the regional representation of its technical staff, which geographically coincides with the distribution of signatory nations. Many of our managers and technicians, myself included, were integral to the development and implementation of land codes for their own communities. Mine is Sioux First Nation. This insight has been invaluable to the support provided to communities proceeding towards self-government. So if you're not sure who your main point of contact is, you can connect with Patty, who's the BC Regional Manager, and she will always connect you with your dedicated technician. You can also find information about our support services team on our website. And now I'm ready for the next slide. So this is just a description of, an in-short description of the support services we provide. The operational, developmental, and technical support, environment and enforcement support services, land description and survey-related matters, training, mentorship, and professional development, which you're going to hear a bit about coming up here from Angie, land use planning and GIS, and of course, community engagement and outreach. Next slide, please. Okay, let's get into the development of land code. So this graphic, if you're like me and a visual learner, it's helpful to see kind of what that process looks like. This graphic demonstrates a 3-year developmental phase process. And while the process can take up to 3 years, some nations will do it in 2, and still others may take longer. Just depends on what creeps up while you're in the process of developing your land code and negotiating your individual agreement. But as you can see by this slide, as I've mentioned, you're going to develop your land code, decide on your CRP process, and Indigenous Services is going to provide you with all the information in their possession about what's happened on your reserves since they were created. The verifier is going to verify that land code and the CRP, and the First Nation and ISC are continuing through this process to develop that individual agreement. Ultimately, the chief of the nation and ISC are going to initial that individual agreement prior to vote. Once that's done, the First Nations members on and off reserve are going to vote on that land code and the individual agreement simultaneously. Assuming you have a positive vote, the chief and the ISC minister are going to sign that individual agreement and make it so. Next slide, please. Okay. So each First Nations owned land code must outline or address the following. It's a description of the lands to be governed under the land code. It sets out the rules and procedures for land use and occupation under licenses, leases, allotments, certificates of possession, custom allocations, traditional holdings, or any other custom of a First Nation. Procedures for the estate-related transfer of an interest or a land right in First Nations lands. Land lawmaking procedures, community approval requirements, financial management and accountability for First Nation land revenues, dispute resolution and appeals, and of course, procedures for amending the land code. Thank you. So why do First Nations folks want to have a land code? Lots of reasons. First of all, it empowers First Nations and their members to make decisions according to their own rules and processes, which of course will always incorporate the traditions and culture of the respective First Nations developing their codes. So the land code recognizes First Nation as a government with lawmaking authority. As I've mentioned, it replaces 44 sections of the Indian Act pertaining to lands management. It can lead to more efficient and quicker decision-making. It definitely increases transparency and accountability to the community, and it protects First Nations land from ever being diminished in size. I'm very happy to pass it over again to Jean to provide an overview of that individual agreement.
Thanks, Bonnie. So yeah, the individual agreement is an important aspect of the developmental process. It's developed jointly between a First Nation and Canada, which requires member approval by vote. It's an agreement that has had over 20 years worth of implementation experience and has undergone several legal reviews. So the wording is carefully crafted so that it can apply to First Nations across Canada. That's why the body of the individual agreement is largely templated. It allowed us to make an advancement when it comes to the signing of the individual agreement. Because of the templated piece, we're able to delegate the approval of the IA to the Regional Director General in each region, which really has sped up the process significantly. Previously, we would have had to have sent it off to headquarters to get signed by the minister, which could have taken a bit of time. And the First Nation is really represented in the annexes. That's where the individuality of each First Nation is really encapsulated. So I'm just going to do a review of each of the annexes included in the individual agreement, so you have a bit of understanding of the work that's involved in that. There are 7 annexes, A through G, which are customized for each First Nation. So if we could go to the next slide, we can take a look at the first few annexes. The first being the funding provided by Canada. So Annex A outlines the contribution of funding that Canada puts towards a First Nations land governance. It's an operational funding formula that's negotiated between the Lands Advisory Board and on behalf of First Nations in Canada, and is done every 5 years. So the most recent funding formula was negotiated between 2018-19 and is due to expire in 2023. So there are negotiations ongoing for the next funding formula. But it outlines the contribution of Canada's funding to a First Nation when they're operational under their own land code. The funding formula itself, considers things such as population, land mass, and land transactions, including things that are recorded in the Indian land registry system, such as leases, permits, CPs. And it also includes a transitional funding amount. So for the first 2 years that a community is operational under their own land code, they'll receive an additional allocation for those first 2 years to help assist with taking on all of that work, whether it's used for, improving your lands office, bylaw implementation, things of that sort. Annex B deals with the transfer of monies. So this relates to the revenue and capital funding that's held in trust by Canada for a First Nation. And one of the big improvements with the amendment to the Framework Agreement and to the First Nation Land Management Act in 2018 was that we can now release the capital monies. Previously, it was only the revenue monies that we're able to issue after First Nation became operational. So once you have a successful vote and become operational under your own land code, then Canada will transfer those monies to the First Nation within 30 days. The next annex is Annex C, and this includes a list of all interests and license granted by Canada under the Indian Act. So these are all of the instruments that a First Nation will be responsible for managing under their own land code. So we want to ensure that the information in there is representative of what's actually happening on your reserve lands. The individual agreement in this annex will include copies from the Indian Land Registry System of the Reserve General Abstract Report, the Evidence of Title Lawful Possessors Report, and the active instruments like leases and permitting reports. So there will be some work conducted between Canada and the First Nation to ensure that all of that information accurately reflects what's happening on your land, so membership is aware of what you'll become responsible for under your own land code. The next annex is Annex D, and this includes a list of all existing information in Canada's possession relating to any actual or potential environmental problems on reserve lands. Our environmental specialists, as I mentioned earlier, will work with the First Nation to conduct an environmental site assessment, a Phase 1, for each reserve. And these reports, the executive summaries, will be included in the individual agreement. And the Phase 1 ESA is done through a joint management committee, which includes members of both the First Nation and Canada, so that those assessments can be done so you understand what's happening when you come under your own land code and related to environmental issues. The next annex is Annex E, and this includes a list of any other information provided by Canada that materially affects the interests and licenses we talked about in Annex C. So for each of those permits, leases, those things, we want to ensure that the community is aware of any upcoming rent reviews, any outstanding rents, instruments that may have recently expired or will expire imminently, or be aware of any unregistered natural resource permits. So we'll work with the community to make sure that they're aware of any of these things, especially within that first year of becoming operational. For example, if you do have a commercial lease with some rent reviews coming up, you want to be well informed ahead of time about those negotiations, because that will now come under the First Nations responsibility for managing that with the third party. Annex F deals with the interim environmental assessment process. So this sets out the process that will apply to First Nations projects on the land until the enactment or coming into force of a First Nations own environmental laws. And they will be consistent with the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act. So up until some First Nations might already be working on their own environmental laws leading into the developmental process or as part of treaty processes. Up until the point where they come into effect, it is the CEA, the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act, that a First Nation will either need to meet or exceed these regulations when applying to projects on reserve lands. And then once your environmental laws come into play, then those are the governing regulations. The final annex is Annex G. So this is the description of First Nations lands. This again comes back to the work that's done by the Natural Resources Canada Survey General Branch. They work with both Canada and the First Nation to approve a land description report, which will be included in the Annex G. So as part of that process, the Survey General Branch will complete a research report, which will outline the reserve creation history for each of the reserves, again, for the period of time that Canada has jurisdiction, and also identifying any natural boundary issues or other issues that may come up that require negotiation between the parties. Sometimes that includes survey work if the boundary of a reserve has shifted, if there's, say, it's on the coast, or there's a water course or something where the lands have changed. It might also have to deal with, if there's any uncertainty about the tenure of some lands. There could be potential for any provincial or municipal government discussions to determine what those are. If it's uncertain, can we clear that up? But this is all to make sure that the community understands exactly what the exterior boundaries of their reserves are, and that they'll have governance over under their own land code. So we do utilize the technical expertise of NRCan, as well as that of the Resource Center, because they also have specialists who can assist with those discussions as well. So it's a real collaborative effort. And in the end result is that you'll have a completed land or individual agreement, which represents all of these components. Once the land code is in effect, the First Nation is considered operational under First Nation land management and has the authority and law-making powers over their lands. So once it's initialed and voted upon by the community and it is successful, then it'll be signed off by the First Nation in Canada, and then everything rolls over to the First Nation, and you've opted out of 44 sections of the Indian Act, and it's then in your court to make decisions about your lands. And I think that's it.
Thanks, Jean. So moving on to discuss community engagement. Having a successful vote does really require a very robust community engagement strategy. We do this in many different ways. We have all kinds of meetings, of course, more virtually these days than we would probably like. It's always nice for us to get into the community and meet with elders and youth and specific families and staff. We do everything from phone calls, emails, going door to door and meeting with members, social media, community newsletters, websites and videos. And when I say we, I mean the nation as well as their support staff from the Resource Center. Once it comes to vote time, we kind of pull out all the stops and invite several of our technicians from around the province or country to come and support the efforts of the nation to really get out there and engage with the community. The verifier will be looking to ensure that that we've done everything in our power to engage with and inform every eligible voter of a respective First Nation. Next, please. Thank you. So community ratification. It's a pretty much a boilerplate kind of a document. It explains a process. Of course, a nation will change it to specify their needs for their community. And important to note that none of the documents we've been talking about will come into effect unless the eligible voters of a nation vote to approve both the land code and the individual agreement. The ratification vote happens according to this community ratification process document, and that is developed by the nation with our support. Thank you. So the process. Ratification of the land code and the individual agreement is a requirement of the framework agreement. Every eligible voter, whether they reside on or off reserve and who is 18 years plus as of the last voting day, must have the opportunity to vote freely. Voting methods include multiple in-person polling stations, depending on the size of the nation. Different stations at different locations, possibly. They do typically mail-in ballots and or electronic voting. all the rage. The community decides the voting requirements and can also determine any thresholds that they may require for approval and participation. Next, thank you. So how do communities implement their land codes? This is a very lovely visual representation of the operational phase for us visual learners. It includes everything from setting up the lands office to developing and enacting laws. A nice little graphic. Thank you. So under your land code, you can make laws, regulations, policies, any structures that you need to put in place to effectively manage your lands and resources. First Nation land laws are akin to federal or provincial acts and have all the same rights and powers within a court of competent jurisdiction. First Nations can still make their own bylaws if they choose under the Indian Act, and First Nations can enforce their enacted land laws. Next. So here is some examples of the various laws that a First Nation may choose to enact. It's pretty well anything to do with lands that you can possibly think of. Land use, zoning and development, trespass enforcement and ticketing, residential tenancy, allotments, interests and licenses, environmental assessment and protection, business permitting and licensing, natural resource management, and First Nations expropriation. So what are the steps? How will you get your community into this developmental phase? So for those of you who are interested, we're going to go through a little bit of a flow here. First, you're going to submit the BCR confirming that you're interested in being a signatory to the framework agreement. Second, you'll complete and submit a land governance community profile form. You'll submit that to Robert Louie's office. Robert is the chair of the Lands Advisory Board. Once you've received your letter of invitation, a document called the Adhesion to the Framework Agreement is signed by your First Nation and by Canada. Next, the Developmental Phase Funding Agreement will be sent to you for signing. The Resource Centre and Canada will sign that as well. That Developmental Phase Funding Agreement, or DPFA, is a tripartite agreement which highlights milestones for the developmental process. It provides for timelines and also identifies the funding, the developmental funding. And now the developmental work begins. So just want to draw your attention to a few places that you can get more information about the framework agreement and various First Nations land land matters. Of course, our website, which is just about to undergo a few more changes, and I believe sometime very soon we'll be launching that new site. Of course, Facebook and YouTube and Vimeo are good resources too. There are many, many wonderful land code videos across the country. One of the engagement activities we often do with the nation is to create a video which reflects their community's desire for having a land code, the reasons that they're getting into it, and it really supports. People are a little more willing to watch a lovely short video over reading a very lengthy document. So it's very helpful to engage and get people interested in what the community is doing. And then of course we have Canada's website. They have all kinds of information on there if you're interested in learning more. And we have just recently gotten into creating podcasts, which has gone wonderfully. And if you're interested, please do click that link and watch or listen to those podcasts. We've got some excellent speakers from across Canada talking about their experiences. Lots of videos, and we put out a Lands Advisor newsletter as well that you might be interested in checking out. So now it is my great pleasure to reintroduce you to Angie Derrickson, who's going to talk to you a bit about our training, mentorship, and professional development.
Great, thanks so much, Bonnie. today, today I'm going to take you through our TMPD strategy, training, mentorship, and professional development strategy. So this mainly will focus on the operational First Nations, but also will be a support for the developmental nations in their transitional phase. And also, if any one of you that are interested and have specific questions about capacity, training and mentorship, please let us know. We're always happy to share our information to support. Of course, everything is to support the signatory First Nations and sharing of best practices. So as Bonnie mentioned, the Resource Center is established by the Lands Advisory Board to undertake technical responsibilities to the First Nations. And this is provided through signatory support. And here we provide curricula and training programs for the implementation of community land codes, and also signatory assistance for First Nations who may encounter difficulties and request assistance from the Resource Center to obtain specific expertise in the issues they require to be resolved. The focus is to equip framework agreement communities with the necessary knowledge and tools to carry out the implementation of their unique governance authority over their reserve lands, and to also gain an overall understanding of the issues and topics that they may face in their roles under the First Nations Land Code. So we have a comprehensive list of land governance functions, and they've been identified as essential to the management and governance of land, environment, and resources under a land code. And we can review these activities as governance. So this includes development and implementation of formal legislative and political structures, and are utilized to create, administrate, and enforce laws relating to the development, conservation, protection, and management, use and possession of your lands. Under compliance, here we include monitoring systems for specific obligations, recognition of the First Nations authorities, and support the reporting activities of the framework agreement operational communities. And then we have management. And under management, we support the day-to-day activities and due diligence of First Nations Lands Office and their environmental staff, the development of processes to meet their strategic vision of their community reserve lands and resources under their land code. So the Resource Center works to assist signatory communities in identifying each of their unique governance priorities, needs, and work planning for successful implementation of their land code under the framework agreement. Next slide, please, Patty. Perfect. So in this presentation, I'm going to provide an overview of our TMPD strategy and RC support services. This strategy includes or is provided in a flexible and responsive model of delivery. The Resource Center continues to develop and deliver fundamental and technical land governance training under the framework agreement, and so it's adaptive to specific capacity building needs. Our designing principles include real life and reality-based emphasis on the framework agreement land governance components, that it's easy and flexible to access, that the delivery is by staff and experts with framework agreement land governance experience, and that the materials are specific to the requirements of the framework agreement. Our online components are designed to be self-paced and user-directed, and the content and learning experiences can be delivered on demand and adaptive to multiple target audiences. Next slide, please. Perfect. So we continue to work towards providing future training and land governance capacity development under the framework agreement. Our audiences will be advised as workshops and courses become available, and our delivery categories include information and updates, which will provide delivery on general information and updates on specific topics. We have learning and skills, which encourage knowledge sharing and provide skill development by experts in the field. And then we also look at focus groups, which support targeted groups that provide expertise towards a specific subject matter. Workshop topics are identified from direct engagement with our signatory nations and the resource center field staff. Materials and resources are developed to focus specifically on the experience of operational First Nations, as well as the legal and practical considerations associated with land code implementation. I see Patty's flipping around there. Giving you some hints into what's next.
Sorry, Ange.
Oh, it's all
I'm
good.
trying to track the chat and the screen changes. So I apologize for everyone for the whirlwinds.
No worries. We are, oh, next slide, please. So our 2021 virtual workshops. So we are excited to announce our new schedule, which will focus on delivery of 3-hour workshops, providing enhanced engagement options, and encourages virtual networking opportunities amongst all our participants. You can find our upcoming workshops online at labrc.com/events, as well as you can also access our past events at on the website, where you can link to the resources and materials in a downloadable form. And if you have any issues connecting to any of those materials, just give us a shout and any one of our staff will be able to support you in getting the information that you're looking for. And our next workshop is currently open for registration. We do have this Thursday, introduction to the new LABRC National Land Registry workshop. And then on June 10th, we have a land development, public works and infrastructure under the land code workshop. And registration for that one should be opening later this week. We encourage and welcome you all to attend. On the, okay, next slide, we're there already. No, oh, sorry. Sorry, Patty. Slide 40. Perfect. So our online courses, there are presently over 50 online courses available that have been created on topics addressing key functions of your land governance office. Land managers or other lands related staff can use these to support operating under the framework agreement. Our online courses are developed to auto-fit any screen so that you're able to view the course on any device, along with supporting workbooks, presentation, and supplemental resources that can be used to used in focusing webinars, workshops, and individual learning. This format also supports communities that might have limited connectivity. So we want to make sure we're establishing these in a broad way for you to use with your community. Even in your land committee working groups, you can bring these forward and do them as a group or as an individual, or we had originally adapted it so if you were traveling around, which I know we've all been limited on now, but to be able to have it on your tablet to do a course while you're on the airplane or things like that was the intent. And these courses also include knowledge checks. These are to do self-assessments on your understanding of the course material and to identify any knowledge gaps that would trigger you to contact the Resource Center to get specific information on your unique issues from our specialized staff and advisors. Courses are reviewed and updated periodically to reflect changing needs in land governance, including law development and evolving best practices of framework agreement signatories. The ongoing development of courses are based on workshops and First Nation needs. The objective of the TMPD strategy is not to compete with existing institutions that offer various types of courses or training in lands related areas, but to work on building ongoing partnerships that complement and enhance the framework agreement specifics in land governance education that is not offered elsewhere. And you can find our online course catalog on our website, and it all has active links to the courses. On the next slide, we're going to talk about our land governance manual. So this is a resource tool for operational First Nations under the Framework Agreement, and it provides extensive documentation, process support and guidance, and it's available electronically on a web-based app for land staff to reference as required. The materials are compiled based on 20+ years of land code implementation experience. And the original information was collected through a series of ongoing think tank sessions. These sessions focused on capacity building sessions, which encouraged the discussion on current land governance practices and experiences as they related to various types of governance topics. This ensured that the land governance manual included regional perspectives, procedures, and contributions from operational First Nations across Canada. The land governance manual has been formatted by subject matter with quick access through a table of contents and links to our resource center, resources and knowledge repository. And these chapters continue to be built on the successes, challenges, and needs of the signatory First Nations. Next slide, please, Patty. So our knowledge repository, which we also call a resource and knowledge sharing, which it'll be reflected on our new website. The ability to host a searchable electronic knowledge repository of land governance examples, cases, templates, and other resource tools to support operational First Nations is central to the design philosophy of the TMPD strategy. So all the resources contained in this site are intended for First Nations use. It has been created in collaboration with operational First Nations for First Nations. As First Nations continue to advance in land governance and management procedures, we continue to work on updating these materials to the best of our ability to reflect ongoing updates and best practices. Our website continues to be implemented on an ongoing basis, along with other tools being considered to allow for enhanced access points to the knowledge repository. As you can see, our examples are based on our new website. So if you go look at our website right now, it won't look the same, but hopefully by the end of this week, it will be our new website. And direct community support. So one of the key strategy considerations is the ability to reach, inform, educate, and support the various intended audiences involved in Framework Agreement First Nation communities. Support for land code development, implementation, and land governance activities needs to be delivered community-wide. So we look at our audience is to be included as our land governance directors, lands managers, land staff, and other administration and departmental staff, along with chief and councils and your leadership. Also including your lands committees and your community members, of course. So the Resource Center staff are available to assist communities directly in identifying your priorities and needs and work planning. If you're interested in this service, we encourage you to contact your RC support technician or the TMPD team, and we can set a time to discuss your specific needs and support the development of a capacity training plan for your community. Next slide, we have our Knowledge Paths tool, which is our newest addition to the TMPD strategy. It's now available for registration, and learners can create their own Knowledge Path account under the strategy. Unfortunately, non-signatory members are not available at this time, but we do encourage those that are signatories to create an account. The Knowledge Path is a valuable tool that can be used to inform, expand, and support your learning goals. Identify your learning needs to strengthen your core land governance competencies that lead to the growth and advancement in your knowledge, success, and effective government approaches over your community lands and resources. We hope We look forward to continuing the implementation of this learning management system this fiscal year and hope you find it useful. And my last slide, I again reflect Bonnie's comments that we're celebrating our 25th year anniversary of the Framework Agreement on First Nation Land Management. And since 1996, there have been 99 First Nations that have successfully ratified their community land codes. 3 of those have moved into self-governance arrangements, and 96 First Nations are actively implementing their land codes. These signatories create our diverse community of practice and support. We work with the TMPD strategy to coordinate knowledge sharing services between Framework Agreement signatory First Nations across Canada. And we continue to build on signatories' successes, challenges, and needs. Providing access to RC expertise for advice and support services, mentoring by RC experts and operational community representatives, and accessing our LAB directors upon request. We encourage all signatories to participate in the TMPD opportunities that are being offered, and in looking at the virtual networking and sharing experiences is key to all of our success. And that's, yeah, back to Bonnie or Patty, who's next.
Thanks a lot, Angie. Now we'd like to open it up to any questions that anyone may have. Feel free to type it in the chat if you're more comfortable that way, or just jump in. Anything? Good joke maybe, or a bit of a story? All right, well, it sounds like we did a good job in terms of providing information, and or sometimes it may take some time for you to reflect on it, and you may have questions after. That you're right, Sally, there's a lot of information contained in there to go through. Fortunately, everyone on the call is available for calls and meetings virtually to walk through some of those questions that you may have. For communities who have not yet explored the process and you're looking for a meeting with the Resource Center, with Canada, or you're wanting to hear from other communities who have done this already, we can coordinate a call. Usually there's either a council meeting, an information meeting, maybe it's a community meeting, and you're doing comprehensive community planning or land use planning or another related initiative. We would be happy to bring information to you to consider in those processes. So we have a board of Lands Advisory Board directors, as Bonnie had described in part of her presentation. Those directors are available to you for sharing their experiences. So in BC, there are 5, plus the chairman, Robert Louis from the West Bank First Nation. And their bios and who they are is on our website. So if you think there's a lot of information in this PowerPoint, just wait till you get to our website, because it is full of information and videos and tips, and all the previous workshops and webinars that we've done in the past are available on there as well. Yeah, so here's some emails for our presenters today. We have Bonnie, Jean, and Angie, and they're available at your disposal to answer any questions that you have as you consider some of this. And I really want to thank you all for hanging in there with some of the technical challenges I was having and keeping on the right slide and bearing with us, but really happy you took the time to participate in our workshop today, and I hope you found it helpful and a good resource for you as you learn more about what the framework agreement is, what is land code development, what does it mean, who's involved, and is my community already involved? If you don't see them on the maps, then it very well be that they're still in that consideration mode, or perhaps doing something else. And there are a lot of great resources in there depending on whatever regime you're under. So feel free to use those as you work through issues and matters in your community. So I'd just like to say thank you and open it up to our presenters for some closing remarks. And if they have anything else that they would like to add, I'll open it up to everyone now.
Thank you, Patty. I just want to thank everyone for participating today. It has been a pleasure to provide you with an overview. I recognize that it is overwhelming and there is just an absolute ton of information to go through and understand. And that's what our job is. Our job is to walk you through that step by step. You would never feel alone in this process. We're there for you as much or as little as you need from us. It's really always such a great pleasure for me to speak to the process. I have a great deal of passion for it. It is extremely important work. It sounds complicated, it sounds difficult, and yet it is something that we need to go through as First Nations people in order to reassume what we have had since time immemorial, which is the ability to manage our lands and resources in a way that works for us. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah, just, really a reflection on Patty and Bonnie's comments that it is a lot of information to absorb, but we are here to help you kind of compartmentalize what we have, but mostly to help focus on what your strategic vision is and what works best for your community. This is not a copy and paste process. This is creating your land governance structure, and that flows throughout your organization. And so we are really here to help just showcase what the other signatories have done across Canada. I feel very fortunate to be in this position to work with all the nations across Canada. It's amazing. Everybody is so great. Everybody shares their knowledge. We are a big, happy family, we like to say, in just encouraging and supporting one another with information and material that we're working on, so that everybody's not recreating the wheel. We like to share and enhance those experiences and approaches that nations are taking to solidify their land governance. So thanks so much. It was an honor to present today.
Yes, thank you everyone for participating in this workshop today. In the short time that I have been working with the Lands Modernization Unit at ISC, it really has been a great honor to work with the communities. I've had the opportunity to do so. It is one of those opportunities to see a First Nation regain the control and the jurisdiction over their lands. Given the history that we have, it is one of the really amazing initiatives that allows for First Nations to really take ownership, regain ownership of their land management. And just watching, my colleagues, as well as the colleagues at the Resource Center, put everything they have into this work, it really is quite special. And if you are interested, we've all said there's a lot of information, but I think a good introductory way is to look at some of those land code videos from communities who are currently operational. They are very inspirational. And yes, thank you so much. We are always happy to participate in any calls, discussions, respond to any emails. So please let us know anytime you have any inquiries, and we'd be happy to follow up. Thanks again so much.
Thanks, everyone. I hope that you enjoy the rest of Links to Learning this year virtually, and hopefully we will be doing this in person next year. Or maybe it's a combination. Who knows what the future will begin or bring, I guess. So looking forward to it. Great.